Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Curtis Childs, and he is with the Swedenborg organization. Now, I should know your title, but what is your title, Swedenborg?
Yeah, I'm the vice president of programming at the Swedenborg Foundation.
Okay, and what is Swedenborg?
Swedenborg is a scientist and Christian mystic who lived in the 1700s in Sweden and traveled throughout Europe. He was a very well-renowned and famous scientist that made a lot of it, scientists and inventor who made a lot of advances in a lot of fields. But he has the interesting marker of midway through a very successful career, starting to have these experiences of God. He met Jesus and said he had heaven opened up to him and was able to go and explore it, write it down, and bring it back. And so he produced these really thorough books in which he laid out what he felt like was a clarifying theology of Christianity. And that was a shocker to the scientific community. Very quickly, he became sort of a running joke as, oh, this guy, has gone all Jesus on us. But he is also influenced a lot of really important thinkers and people. I mean, through theologians, he's influenced, but also through artists and scholars. Emerson, Thoreau, he influenced people like Helen Keller, who have made big differences in society, architecture, all these areas. So he's both unknown and yet you probably know some of the influence he's had through the ideas, which are now pretty widespread in not just within Christianity, but outside in the rest of the world as well.
Now, am I understanding correctly? Like, he was in the top of a lot of scientific fields of his time. And when he had come out about this, like, they stripped him of everything.
Back when Swedenborg was alive, science was a little bit simpler, or I should say a lot simpler than it is now. Our scientific understanding was not nearly as sophisticated. So right now, the idea that somebody could be at the top of many different scientific fields is really hard to believe, because you have to be such a specialist just to understand one part of 1% of the things they're doing at some MIT robotics lab or something. But back in those days, yeah, you could have one person who was smart enough that they were at the forefront of a number of fields, and Swedenborg absolutely was that. He was a leading anatomist. He had brought the first scientific journal to Sweden. He founded the scientific branch of crystallography. There's a lot of things that he was doing, as well as being an inventor, and had an important position in Sweden's mining industry, which was a major industry for a world power at the time. He was also involved in the Swedish government. He had a lot of things going for him. When he brought out when he took his theological turn and started to talk instead about Christian theology and his near-death or what you would now call spiritual experiences, he suffered some technical setbacks. His works got put on trial for heresy in Sweden, but mainly it was in the court of public opinion. So he had a lot of people come out and mock him and question his sanity and his credentials as a scientist. So he gained some respect of some people, but overall he lost a lot of the credibility that he had built up, which he didn't mind. To him, he was convinced that the mission he was on, which he said he was sent on by Jesus when they met, he thought that was so much more important, and thought, looking back on his life, was thinking, look, this is what everything I'd been doing was building towards. All of this knowledge I had about how the world works and how these different scientific fields work, this was all preparing me to be able to understand these much more important truths about how life after death works, about how the Bible works, about who God is. And to him, that was what he called divine providence. This was God leading him throughout his life for the purpose that God had for him. And so everything that he did previously was just meant to be important foundation for the real stuff that his life would turn out to be about.
Now, what year time frame are we talking about?
So his first publications of these theological materials were in the late 1740s, I believe. His most popular book, Heaven and Hell, came out in 1758, and he continued publishing up until close to his death. I think it was in the mid 1770s.
Was there a problem with him, the Christianity? Because I'm assuming like mostly they were Christian at the time, or what, or did they think this was witchcraft? Which side was they going towards?
Yeah, there was both. There were both problems with both. So yes, the Sweden was essentially like a Christian theocracy at the time, to the point where Swedenborg couldn't even publish his books in Sweden because they didn't line up with official church doctrine. So he had to travel to London and to Amsterdam, which were two cities that had more freedom of the press. And so that's where he was allowed to publish these books. And yes, a lot of the things that he was saying in his books, for example, that God is one, that Jesus Christ is God rather than being one part of God, that you can find the Trinity in Jesus Christ, that was against doctrine at the time. Also, that non-Christians could go to heaven if they lived a life of love and belief in God. That
Boy,
was
Christians
something.
don't like that one, do they?
No, and even at the time, Protestants were upset if you said Catholics could go to heaven, and Catholics were upset if you said Protestants could go to heaven. And Swedenborg, who was a Protestant, and his father was a Lutheran bishop, so an important person in the church, Swedenborg wrote extensively about, sure, that some, not all Catholics, but plenty of Catholics were going to heaven. And that was probably more upsetting to the Christians in his day than his assertion that people outside the Christian church who were living good lives, who were living the kind of life that Jesus taught us to live, could go to heaven. These kinds of things were upsetting to the church. On the opposite side, Swedenborg's accounts of having spiritual experiences, for example, were certainly seen as bizarre and out there. And a lot of the things that he reported, people thought, okay, this is either it's just insanity or it's too. We didn't have a new age term then. I don't know if he was ever accused of witchcraft, but certainly people either just thought he was lying or he had gone crazy, people who didn't believe him. So it was coming from all sides. And Swedenborg knew this when he started publishing. He wrote early on in his first theological work, said, I know that people will say that nobody can talk to spirits and angels as long as they're alive in the world. I know they're going to say, I just made this up to gain fame or influence or money, but by this I'm not deterred, because I've seen, I've heard, and I've felt. And he
had the fame and influence, but this he knew was causing him to lose it. I mean, that's got to say something.
He definitely had a lot to lose, and lost it, and didn't seem to mind. I think he was. I think that he was sad that more of what he felt like were these really important truths, that they weren't more valued by the world that he put him into. But I don't think he had really any grief for the loss of his reputation, because just prior to these spiritual experiences that he had, he went through this process that he actually documented, where he was God got him out of his pride. So he had this issue with being under the belief that he was better than other people because he was smarter than other people. He was more successful than other people. So he was under the sway of what he called the devil, which is believing that you're greater than other people and not looking to God as being the one from whom all ability and intelligence and everything comes from. So he lays out in these experiences that he had at the very beginning when he was coming into this theological period, how he had to get humbled and get broken down and go through a lot of things so that he would be freed from this belief that he was better than anyone. So I think by the time he really started putting these books out, he had been through the ringer. He had gone through a lot of repentance and reformation that Jesus calls us to, and it didn't sting like it used to. For him, he describes how it used to make him upset if someone didn't mention him when they were mentioning the great scientists in some field, But because of what he felt like Jesus had done for him, it didn't matter anymore to him. What mattered was the anguish that he had from then on, was knowing that people were misled about what was really important for their spiritual life. And they were misled about what heaven is like and what hell is like and what makes us go to heaven or hell. So to him, this was the important thing. We've got to tell people the true meaning of Christianity so that they can be preparing themselves to follow what God has laid out for us to do.
It makes me think of the movie Come Sunday. Have you seen that? It's
No, I
a
haven't.
true story. I think it's on Netflix. A true story of a pastor that he's at the top of his game, at the top evangelist, and he's doing great. And God talks to him one night, and I forget the exact words, but like brings it upon him that what you're saying Swedenborg was about was you can go to heaven without knowing Jesus.
Yeah.
And he spoke that in his church, and they threw him out. They gave him a chance to take it back and say, you didn't mean it, or you're going to lose it. And he decided to stick with his guns. He lost everything, and he started his own church and rebuild. But it come to him that this strict thought of, if you don't do X, Y, Z, you don't get to go to heaven. And he was making people look at themselves, because this one person, there's an example of this guy really didn't like his dad, and his dad died, and he knows his dad's in hell. And he's like, and you want him to stay there, don't you? You know, and that really made that Christian like get upset, instead of really looking at themselves like, what's wrong with me? That, yeah, I really want him to stay in hell. You know, because I think of my stepfather, you know, I hope he's in hell, and I really want him to stay in hell. Well, you know, that's not Christian. But, you know, but that is kind of the Christian mindset, is if you don't do this and this, you won't get to go to heaven. Well, those people are Satan. Those people, because they don't agree with me, they're bad. And then, you know, we have, like with the Swedenborg times, is the scientific community, the educated community, who may not them all in a general thing, but, you know, they may not like Christianity, thinking that those people are stupid. They're not enlightened. They're not educated. Because if they did, they would realize there's not a God. So they're stupid. When then the Christians think, you know, there's this big, and all it is, I think, comes down to his ego.
Yeah. Yeah. But by their fruits, you will know them. If you're saying we've got Jesus here with us, but yet you are coming out absolutely opposite to what Jesus taught and how Jesus was, which was to say compassion, don't he who is without sin throw the first stone. There are so many instances of people being in the state of mind that the Pharisees were in, where they're trying to get him on the rules, and they're trying to say this person's unclean, and Jesus is saying that's not true. That what's that line? How many of you will say to me, Lord, Lord, but don't do what I command you to do? I think that people can tell, even though you say we know what Jesus wants and we're speaking for Jesus, but you don't act like Jesus, and you don't seem to exude the love that Jesus stands for, which is why people are so magnetized to Jesus and want to follow Jesus. You just tell, like the fruit is rotten. There's no way the tree is good.
I had a guest, Jeffrey Welsh, that really brought this home the other day. And during our interview, in high school, he skipped school a lot because his mother was alcoholic. He had to be home. And this teacher that was known to be really mean had brought him in the office and says, you're not going to graduate. Or you know, you don't have enough credits to graduate or whatever. And he's like, yeah, I know. I knew I was going to graduate. And she said, well, don't come back to school. She says, but I want you to come here. She gave him a report card, and she gave him, I believe she called it an honorary degree. And she was going to let him graduate. And he's, you know, he said, well, I don't have a cap and gown. It's too late. But there was someone in his class that died, and he had already got a cap and gown and let him have his. And then later he went on, you know, he had his near-death experience. And later he went on, and I believe it was his dad that was on his deathbed, and his dad wasn't a believer. but on his deathbed, he had some spiritual experiences that obviously Jesus was bringing him home. The angels was bringing him home. And I got kind of choked up and I was like, he got an honorary degree.
Oh, yeah. Now, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, but those who do the will of my Father in heaven. If you get around somebody who's living, who has the love of God inside them, it is doing greater love has no one than this than to lay down their life for their friend. That kind of love where you say, I'm going to give you something. I love you. I would like to give of myself to see you happy. Everybody instinctively can tell that is following Jesus. And of course, if Jesus is God and God made the whole world, and there's all these people in the world, and every single person obviously is God's child. If God didn't design a system that gives everybody a great chance to go to heaven, is that a good parent? So if you have to say the name of Jesus Christ inside a church, which only exists in a certain little percentage of the world, and that people can have an aversion to church for all kinds of reasons, if that keeps you from going to heaven, then how can you say that God is being a responsible parent?
Yeah,
I think,
because, say one of my children, say they don't speak to me for decades, and on my deathbed, they come. I'm going to tell that child how much I love them. I never stop loving them. And that's God's love.
when you said that, I got these goosebumps because you're describing love, that it's forgiveness. It's saying, even though you shut me out and that hurt me for all these years, as soon as you come back, I'm going to lay aside my pride and I just want to tell you how much I love you. That is the nature of love. So is God going to be less loving than that?
Right.
God is going to be that to infinity. Isn't that the prodigal son? Isn't that the message of that story? Is that's the nature of God's love? Isn't that the sheep that he left all the 99 behind to go find that one sheep? That is all of the message of Jesus Christ. And there's no way that some of us are more loving than God is. There's no way because where does love come from? It comes from God. So we can tell. This is stuff people know instinctively. They're scared because they have pastors threatening them, and the pastors may be doing it out of a good motive. They may really believe it, but this is what the primary message that Swedenborg was bringing back is that he says that that people made the mistake of separating the two great commandments, which are to love the Lord and love your neighbor, from religion. So they made it entirely about the belief system and not about the thing that Jesus says on which hang all the law and the prophets. And when you do that, you get all this mess that we're talking about, where people are afraid that good people who are confused will go to hell because they didn't know to say the right thing at the right time. And the people who don't have access to the Christian church will go to hell because they were born in the wrong place in the world. That doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
Yeah. And, I brought up a couple of times before, but that lady that was at the school and the guy come in that was all over news for a while, to do a school shooting. He was fully armed and ready. And she got talking to him and she's, no, I've had hard times too. And this happened to me and that happened. And oh, honey, I just understand, we can just get, and he ended up at the end of the day, put his guns down and nobody was hurt. And she treated him like a human being.
Yeah.
And like, wow, the power of love and compassion can stop all those bullets and all that mayhem. And what did we learn? Did the world change because of that? No.
Yeah, but it shows you the power of love, and love is that is telling you something about Jesus. Just observing that love in action. Yes, absolutely. You got to read the Gospels. They give you this amazing account of it. Doctrine and ideas are really important, but if you shut out the love side, you aren't going to understand it. You're seeing only part of the picture, and you won't get a true picture of who God is.
Yeah, and I know people look at Swedenborg and they assume New Age, weird stuff, far out there. It's against Christianity, and they just don't know what they're talking about, which a lot of us don't know what we're talking about. We make these quick assumptions and just that's it.
Yeah, it's not against Christianity, and even the weirdness of it. There's the book of Revelation is weird. It doesn't mean that it doesn't mean something.
Right.
And Swedenborg was adamant that the kinds of things he's experiencing are things that many people experience, and they're part of the same system that was what the prophets experienced. The Bible is full of these stories of visions and symbolism and parable that Swedenborg is saying that's at the heart of how the Bible is written. It's not something new or different that's being brought in. I feel like reading Swedenborg's material has brought me to a love for what's in the Bible way beyond what I would have. I don't know if I would have stuck around the Bible. I might have seen, as you're saying, some Christians who are acting in ways that I find to be abhorrent and not loving. And I might have said, well, it can't be that they really have it. This must not be true. I would look at some of the things in the Bible, these perplexing statements when God, it seems to be really violent and really judgmental, and the contradictions and things. I wouldn't know what to do with those. But because I got
Christianity is going to survive, and I hope it does. I'm a Christian. Of course I want to see it survive more than anything. But I think we all, as Christians, need to be kinder, so people aren't afraid. When somebody comes to your church, welcome them. Don't judge them. When you interact with the community and you're a Christian, let them know you're a Christian by how nice you treat them, not how much you judge them and show them how superior you are because you're a Christian. And you mentioned visions, and is that mainly what his things are? Their visions, their out-of-body experiences, spiritual experiences?
Yes. Swedenborg described it as having the eyes of his spirit opened. He says that all of us have a spirit in our bodies, which is, I think, not news to anybody who's in Christianity or many other religious traditions. And he says that we all have a spirit right now, and our spirit is a person. Like it's like the body is in the form of a person. It's in God's image. The spirit's in God's image. So your spirit has eyes and it has ears. It's closely linked with your whole body right now. And so we are in the spiritual world, or the afterlife, or where heaven and hell exist right now in terms of our spirits, but we don't see it around us, and we don't hear it, and we don't feel it because our spiritual eyes are closed, our spiritual ears are closed. Anybody who has a spiritual experience or a vision or something, it's a result of their spiritual eyes opening and them seeing what's there or what God is showing them in the spiritual world. So the spiritual experiences that Swedenborg had, there's a lot of similarities between them and what people now call near-death experiences. In the book that coined the term near-death experiences, which was Life After Life by Raymond Moody, who was I got to meet him a couple of times, and supremely kind guy and curious and thorough. And he, in that book, included a section on Swedenborg because he said this is a historical example of somebody having experiences hundreds of years before the modern near-death experience phenomenon that seem like the same kind of thing. Now, a lot of people will report things that aren't a classic near-death experience, because a near-death experience is, near-death implies that it's triggered by something happened. You got in a car accident, or something fell on you and you almost died, or you were under some great physical trauma, and that's what triggered the experience. Some people say they have out-of-body experiences without that. And Swedenborg, generally, his experiences were not linked to any kind of physical threat. He just had his spiritual eyes opened, And this was a process that happened throughout his regeneration, which we were talking about before, the period where he was having to become humble and really understand that Jesus is the center of everything. Through that, he got in this state where his spiritual eyes were open. And he said, this is a state that actually people were meant to be in this state. The way that God had designed it initially, we were meant to be able to get to see and experience Jesus. We were meant to be able to talk with angels while we were still alive in the world. It wasn't meant to be this great mystery of what's it like after you die, and a couple people get a glimpse. But because people over centuries have become worldly and become selfish, we've kind of shut ourselves off to that. We've destroyed that communication, but it can get opened back up. So what Swedenborg did, he's not some special group of person that has superpowers that we don't have. This is something that hopefully the world is heading back toward. And it's something that has been part of religious tradition and Christianity since the beginning. The whole Bible is full of the accounts of prophets having spiritual experiences and seeing things in the spiritual world, that it's the same spiritual world that Swedenborg is describing. Now, the prophets were something a little different than what Swedenborg is. He says that they were directly representing states of the divine, so they had this more immediate job to do, whereas Swedenborg is really more writing an explainer for all of us. But everybody's still operating inside the universe that God made, and experiencing things and abiding by the rules that God has laid out. So this is part of how God communicates to all of us. And Swedenborg just got to see another part of that and explain it so that we can be more aware of how to understand the things that Jesus says, the things that are said in the Bible.
I don't think we discuss visions enough. I mean, we talk about near-death experiences, spiritual experiences, out-of-body experiences, but visions is a whole different, but similar yet thing. It is just a knowing, a vision that opens you up into an understanding as if you were having a near-death experience. I mean, I've had a few in my life, and it's just, I mean, aha moment really, I mean, it doesn't give it justice, but that's, similar. It's just such a clarity that gives you, you might get a picture. Like the day that I decided, I grabbed my laptop and started writing my book, I had a vision. And right before that vision, I was thinking, all the crap about life. And like, I was like waving the white flag, like I give up, not trying to do anything anymore. I'm just going to sit life out because there's no such thing as justice. And I just had one of those times. I was struggling with PTSD. I couldn't stop the intrusive, the bad memories. And I just felt like life had defeated me. And I'm just going to be left with this the rest of my life. And I was disabled by it. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I get this vision. And it's just, I'm from above and I'm looking down at myself. And I've been over in this creek in the woods, which is very similar to the creek we had at home. We weren't home at the time. And I was a younger woman, but I was bent over and I was picking up something. It was like these bits of light as I went along. So I could picking up rocks or something out. I was picking up these bits of light. And then this dim forest it got bright. And then this aha moment, why would you think that would bring an aha moment? But it did. I realized from just that I was burying all the spiritual experiences under the rug with the bad child abuse experience and things, trauma, just the same. And I realized I had to let people know these spiritual things. But I had to tell the bad stuff too, so they'd appreciate and understand the good. And I just grabbed my laptop. It was just like, and I wrote for 3 months and I was done with my book. It was like, if it hadn't been for that vision that took me over and just, you person might think, how would seeing yourself in a creek, bent over, picking up something, do that? But it did. and it just set it in motion. And I knew the whole time, like it seemed like there was somebody on the other side of my laptop. Like I was just to tell my story to this invisible person and not question it all, just put down what I remember, don't question it. And I just poured it out. And it felt like the PTSD, like it's this wound that had not healed properly and it was cut open and bleeding out. And but I was getting cleansed. It sounds weird, but those visions is just something that I don't think we talk about enough or understand enough. I know we don't study them, but it sounds like with the Swedenborg, that's exactly what he was talking about.
Yeah. Well, thank you for, I love just getting to hear some of your story right there. And I love that you're sharing your experiences. And I don't think it sounds weird that you could get that kind of epiphany from seeing that imagery, because that is how things are in a lot of media. So the Bible, for example, it's always imagery that's telling you something. So you see John on the Isle of Patmos is seeing this city coming out of the clouds, and it's got a river in the middle, and it's got streets made of gold, and it's got different kinds of gemstones in the foundation, and all that means something. So that you could have had some kind of experience where somebody was telling you, you've buried these things under, but to see that image and to let you come to that, somehow looking at that gave you this much clearer picture of it. Isn't that what we try to do in movies and in books, where they try to say, like, we're going to have this tree is kind of like a symbol of this character's childhood, and that language is potent and it speaks to us. And I think this is why is Jesus always talking in parables? Why doesn't he just say, when I tell you the word of God, some of you hear it and accept it, but some of you smother it with your craving? He doesn't do that. What he does is says, there was somebody planting seeds, and some of the seeds fell on the ground, and this is what happened to them. He uses symbolism because, and Swedenborg asserts that that's because there's a divine language which is teaching you spiritual things by representing it with physical or natural things. And so you were getting taught this spiritual thing by a natural represent, which is somebody yourself bending over, picking things up. That was God was speaking to you through that. So I think it makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, I was like picking them up and just looking at these things, and I've been noticing, because in talking to different guests, which I deny anybody to come on, but some say, well, that wasn't heaven, that wasn't God. This is my experience. Okay. And the other ones are saying, this was God, this was heaven, this is my experience. Okay. But what I find so interesting is they're talking about the same place and the same voice, which comes from the same person. They're just recognizing it as, like when I was in heaven, that has to be God. And so to me, that was God. Now, somebody else might see someone and hear a voice and say such similar things as what I was told, but say, it was a spirit guide, or it was, and I'll try to nail them down. Like, who do you think that was? Well, I don't know, and where Christians, we like, that's God, that's heaven. And they're like, it doesn't matter who it was, it was like, it's all consciousness and all these things. And so, but God is still God, whether we recognize that's God or not, it still is. So
yeah, if you just look at the Bible, is God come and appear to Moses as a burning bush? I mean, a voice in the bush, right? And at other times, God is talked about as a lamb. He appears as a lamb in heaven. There's God is represented by the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle. There's so many, even within the Bible, instances of people experiencing God in different ways. The still small voice. Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, and there's all this thunder and lightning, and that's what the people perceive from God. Then you have Jesus Christ and the human experience of God. So that people seeing God differently is very Christian.
Yeah. And then, even interpreting the Bible differently, so many different interpretations, and but it still all is what it is. It's just our meat brains in our cultures, our hangups and our egos all throwing these different things at it and causing fights over it. But
and my last Bible reference will be when there's somebody who says, somebody comes and asks Jesus about a particular of the law, and or he's saying, what should I do to inherit eternal life, I think. And Jesus says, what's written in the law, and what's your reading of it? Why didn't he just say, here's exactly what it is? Why does he say, what's your reading of it? Why do we have minds? Why did God give us the ability to process information if there's just all you need to do in life is be told exactly what's up and accept it? Then it seems superfluous that we have the ability to think and learn. I think there's something built into us from creation that pushes us toward coming to really understand it for ourselves, and that must be part of God's plan to build his kingdom.
interesting. So let's change the table now and talk about what you came to talk about.
Sure.
Talk about getting me guest off topic.
I liked it. I think it was a good detour.
Okay. So I'll let you, I don't want to paraphrase it for you, but.
Sure. So I know that there's an aspect of Swedenborg's visions which a lot of people have a lot of questions about. And actually, even in his day, people were wondering, we want to hear more about it, which is that he said that heaven is made up not just of people who come from planet Earth, that there are other beings in the universe. We would probably call them aliens. He called them all humans, because he said what makes a human is being in the image and likeness of God, which is really the image and likeness of God is to be able to love and to be able to understand or have wisdom. So he talked about all these beings, all these people from other planets as human. But he did say, and this is really an expansion of the conversation you and I were having, can people outside of these Christian churches go to heaven? Well, is God the God of people who are not from the planet Earth? And there's a lot of things I could say about it, but in general, he says that you absolutely couldn't even make heaven out of just people from our Earth, because God is so expansive and so vast that his plans are to make a heaven from all kinds of people from all over the created universe. And so Swedenborg was never able, he couldn't in his visions go and see other physical parts of the universe, but he could talk to spirits that he believed came from other planets. And he would talk about the way they thought about religion and the way that they thought about God. He asserted that all people throughout the universe ultimately worship Jesus, worship the same God, because that God is present with all of them. And he talked about people of all planets having religion and having faith that they follow, and that is essential to them as the church is to us here.
Now, when you say aliens, are you saying Swedenborg said the word aliens, or did he call them something else?
He called them spirits, and then would reference where they came from. So, for example, he'd say, there was one translation says, an earth in the starry heavens. And he went to go and talk to spirits who had come from that earth. And to do that, he had to you don't have to travel physically, but there's an equivalent spiritually where you have to be getting into a similar state of mind to people that you want to talk to. So if there are people that were very different on their planet, he would have to go through this sort of like a spiritual traveling to get his mind into that state. So I don't know. I don't think he wrote all in Latin, so he wouldn't have used the English term aliens. I think even extraterrestrials, I don't know what the term was that they used back then, but he just always referred to them as spirits of whatever planet he was talking about.
Now, isn't there evidence of that there had to have been spirits, aliens, whatever you want to call them, from another planet, like for the pyramids and different things in our history that they can't answer?
Yeah, I've seen some shows on TV about that. I'm not an expert at all on that. That would be really, really cool if we found out that there was that interaction historically. Swedenborg doesn't talk about any sort of history of spirits from other planets, people from other planets interacting with us. He doesn't go into much detail about it. It's only one small little slice of what he wrote about, but he's more concerned when he's talking to those spirits about the differences between how they think and worship versus how we think and worship. And in general, he found that people from this planet are much more superficial and religiously rigid than spirits from other planets. He would talk about spirits from other planets wondering why we were so wrapped up in material things and wealth, and paid what they felt like was relatively little attention to the things that are have to do with, you know, what is good and true and what is right to do, and spiritual kind of content. So that may be that's what Swedenborg reported, because that's what he was more interested in. It's really like not a tour of the history of aliens, or even he didn't really describe any advanced technology. It seemed to be the ones he was talking to were living pretty simply, but it was really a tour of the religious beliefs and customs of people from other planets.
I don't know. I thought, I don't read the Bible because I don't understand. I have too many questions, nobody can answer it. Because to me, like Adam and Eve, they must be aliens, because they're just dropped here, and then one of the sons goes off and marries from these other like tribes or something. Well, where did they come from? If Adam and Eve's the first, where did all these people come from? So what are Adam and Eve? Are they just like directly these aliens that God sent here to start something new? Because there was other people, or he wouldn't be able to go get a wife.
The math doesn't quite add up there.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess that's just the part of being on Earth, is like there's just a lot that we're not supposed to know.
Yeah, Swedenborg had this fascinating explanation of, for example, Adam and Eve. He's saying that the whole that symbolic language that we're talking about before, like you bending over by the river, and like the book of Revelation and the parables Jesus told, that the whole Bible is written in that language. So Adam and Eve, let's say, instead of thinking about Adam and Eve as this is a description of the first people that lived, which is, there's something wrong with it, because where did the people come from, who they married? Could you really have a whole human race from one genetic line like that? But let's say that you had a vision where you saw, oh, there's these two people, and they're the first two people ever, but they're in this garden, but then they eat of the wrong tree and get kicked out of the garden. Like what would that vision mean? And Swedenborg asserts that things like that, things like the creation story, are a picture of spiritual things. So this is telling us about what happened with the human race that got us so closed off from God. And it's telling us about what we need to do to get back there. This is all a deeper explanation of the kind of teachings Jesus had about repent and live a good life, even down to the creation story. And why was there light before there was the sun and the moon? This is actually a picture of how God creates each one of us into being someone who's born again, rather than where we start out. So that we did some shows. That's a whole nother conversation, but I think you've got it. It gets your wheels turning because it's like, yeah, how could
Yeah, I get stuck on page
yeah,
one. Like I can't get
yeah,
past the first page. I've got all these
yeah,
questions. Nobody can answer to where it justifies anything because what they're depicting God as is this really mean, vengeful person because you took a bite of an apple. Now we all, when childbirth, we have this horrible pain. And I was in labor with my first son, and all I did was cuss Eve. You had to eat that apple, didn't you? You're the reason I'm having this pain. I hate you. This isn't fair. I mean,
yeah. And it doesn't. It's not. The punishment would be disproportionate. Let's say that that Eve was not supposed to eat that apple, and she did. That we're and that Adam wasn't supposed to eat it, and then he did. We're still this many thousand years later, and you're talking about what would have been two people versus these billions now, and everybody's still suffering for that. It feels like that seems like God is out of touch with the ramifications, right?
yeah, and now we have to work really hard for our food. I mean, we've had so many gardens fail, and I'm thinking, well, why did God have to make this so hard? I mean,
Yeah.
even to grow an apple tree, you got to know all this stuff. There's so much knowledge you got to have to grow anything. It's got to have this, it's got to have that, it's got to have these nutrients. Don't put it out before frost, don't do this and that. All this stuff is like, why is it so complicated? But according to the Bible, that's a punishment we have now, to make it hard to grow our food.
Like, I curse you, Adam. I'm trying to do this garden. But it would be like taking a 2-year-old, and if they broke a rule, punishing them for the rest of their life for it. It doesn't match up. It doesn't make any sense. It paints this picture of God as this strange, immoral being, which we get our morality, all the truth and justice and wisdom that comes from God into us. Same thing with love, like the love you're talking about earlier today. There's no way that we are more loving and more wise than God, and more fair and more just. So it's got to be. It can't just be what it appears to be on the surface. It's got to be that, just like as Jesus speaks in parables, that there is a meaning to it, that there is a lesson in it, that once we understand what the lesson really is, it points to a God that is all loving and is just and is the kind of being that you would say, oh, that is God.
Yeah. Loving but strict.
Love and truth. Yeah.
Loving. Yeah. I mean, my mother said to me once that she's noticed how I was raising my boys, and she said, "You are very loving but strict." And I thought, that's a true statement, actually. Surprised my mother got that, because I was very, very loving, but I was strict. I mean, if I caught that you were cheating on your homework, I would take them to their teacher the next day. And, you would admit you're wrong. And one of my daughters took a handful of change. We drove quite a ways back for her to go and apologize and give that change back. I mean, I was strict when it come to morals.
Yeah. But why were you doing that? It wasn't like you weren't thinking, I hate my kid and I'm going to hurt them. You're thinking, this is something I need to do ultimately to help you, because I want to teach you something that, yeah, it'll be unpleasant right now, but this is going to make your life better if you understand this. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It was just, that's wrong. We don't do wrong. You don't steal. I don't care if it's a quarter, you don't steal. And having adopted kids, they may not have learned a lot in, their prior family. And so, I knew that they had things to learn, but I was just, but even with my biological boys from the time they were little, I was just always that way with them. And I'm still that way with with adopted and the biological, that if you're doing wrong, you will pay the consequences. Do not come to me and want me to hide something like from the police or child protection. If you are doing wrong, we will bring it out in the open and deal with it. You just don't do wrong. And I just kind of think we're talking about God, like that sounds really mean, but if God says no, it's no. And I think we have to respect that, just like our parents, you tell your child, no, you expect them that they will not do that thing. But then you love them and you would run into a burning house for them to, risk your life to save them. But no is no. It's just too important that just to live a good life, to live an honest life, and to hope that everybody would, and then we wouldn't have all these problems we have if everybody lived that way. And I was really proud because my boys, they always got the citizenship award every year. And I would tell them, I'm more proud of you getting that than the honor roll. If you would have got, my boys didn't get the honor roll until later on, but I was really proud. They got the citizenship award every year. And I thought, I'm doing something right here. I'm teaching my kids to be good people, and they are, but I don't know. So then, we're talking about, Christianity, we're talking about New Age, and then like you're kind of saying, is basically that golden rule. It should, just foremost and really.
Yeah.
What we
I
do.
think you can't, there's absolutely, religion is teaching us how to do good and how to not do evil. And that's like the divine wisdom. And the divine love is knowing that we're not always going to be able to do it perfectly, and knowing that how to arrange our lives in a way that will best learn the lessons we need to learn in order to bring us into the happiness that God is trying to give us, which is the point of it all.
Yeah. It makes me think of, I always work at child protection, and you'll say someone just killed their wife, and I'm sitting there with them. They just, killed their baby, and I'm sitting there with them. And there'd be so many officers that couldn't even go in the room. They're so mad. They want to beat them up and those kind of things. And I would go right in there. I was a tiny little thing back then. It was young, I would just go right in there and sit there, and they would give me a full confession. And it was a beautiful thing. You wouldn't think it would. It was a beautiful thing, because it was like, I'm not saying I'm no saint, don't get me wrong. It was just, I could tell they wanted to tell the truth. They wanted to like bare their soul, because someone that's like refusing to tell the truth, hiding something, it's going to take them years to get through that, whatever. And then they just like, they're still going to go to prison and that, but I don't know. I just wish that everybody could get on the same page a little more. And because I used to be really rigid in, like my ex, who was Catholic, and he didn't want me to go to like my grandma's church that I was raised up in. And so you just kind of, you stayed away from Catholics. And then the Catholic Church actually taught that you were not allowed to go visit those other churches. And, we're supposed to go to confession and all these things that were being pressed upon me, but in my heart, it wasn't there. But then I had friends that are Christian saying, well, you pray to Mary and you this, and then you think you got to go to confession and you're saved or whatever. It's like, and then the Catholics, they don't like the word saved. Oh, there's more to it than that, than just, saying I'm saved and that's it. And I thought, well, there's more than just going to confession and that's it too. So I guess it's easier to say what's wrong with everything than both solutions. But so Swedenborg, I'm trying to say back to that. So I really like that gets my interest about the visions, him having visions. Because I see that coming a lot in the near-death experiences and the out-of-body experience. They're not calling them visions, but the scene will open up and show them something. And from that, they have this aha moment. I understand. It's just, you're in this realm of knowledge, and it must have been where he was going and where he was attaching to. And you can't, and people are trying to get enlightenment these days, New Age or whatever. And then even, Christians, some will say, well, how come I don't hear God's voice? And I think a lot of the problem with people not accepting NDEs that are Christians and churches saying it's witchcraft, it's false prophets, is I think there's some jealousy. Like, I'm this Christian and I go to church all the time and I do this and this. How come I'm not hearing God's voice? How come I'm not having one of those experiences?
Yeah, no, it's true. And I haven't had one of those experiences, and I don't know if I'd call it jealousy, but I definitely at times feel like, oh, that's a party that I wish I got invited to. But it makes me appreciate more people like you and like Swedenborg who are willing to take the time to share that, because if it's true that you're seeing something beyond what the rest of us have access to right now, because you can write it down, because you can tell your story, that gives the rest of us access to that speech.
I think the closest a person can get to it is when you get in your real creative mode, you get really involved in something and you have this joy and this gratitude. It's that space right there.
Uh-huh. In the
It's
in the
staying in
flow
that
in the flow
space.
state. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Because you're being useful. You're doing something that's
Yeah,
good.
it's just like that creative energy just comes and builds and you feel like you're levitating, and it's to recognize that feeling and catch it more often and hold on to, like I get it, like, talking about NDEs and stuff. Sometimes I'll just feel like, or if I go tell my story, it's like I just kind of step out of my body and somebody else takes over and she's talking, and I never have to like prepare for like, I used to go do talks, I don't do anymore, but because I knew it was just like something stepped in and I stepped out of the way. And I
Yeah.
knew I would go into this perfect state where nothing wrong could happen. It was a strange feeling. Like I didn't expect it at first when it first happened, but then I started trusting I don't have nothing to worry about, because it's just going to take. Now, if I would have to go up and do a speech or anything else, I would bomb. I mean, I have limited vocabulary, I have bad memory, but it's just like something takes over and it's off and running. And it's like you say, it's a flow. And I think Swedenborg must have found that sweet spot.
Yeah.
It just kept going back to it. And I think we all can find our sweet spot, but we're not going to find it when we're filled with anger, resentment, all those bad things. That's not where we're going to find it. And we all have those feelings, but when we get in that sweet spot, if you stop and like, I'm there, and then, I don't know. One time I stepped out on the porch and early in the morning, take dogs out. And all of a sudden this come to me, this knowing that depression, everybody's afraid of depression. You've had a loss and you try to get away from it. People drink or they do drugs or whatever they can to not face it. But just stepping on the porch is just this vision, like knowing come to me that God doesn't give us these hard times without giving us a rescue. And the rescue is, like we were saying, that sweet spot. It's that creativity place. Because after I lost the twins, I had that NDE at 25. I was in this depression. I start drawing house plans and I would just like go to this other place. And I started realizing later, whenever I would have a hard time, I would go into a creative place and start creating. One time I started making dolls and went back to writing house plans, or you can get into with this creative, even dancing. I think sometimes, somebody, you just get into the music and you're dancing, you say you're by yourself and you're in that, just a flow. And there's that spot. And I think like if you've had an NDE or STE or whatever, OB, that you might be able to recognize it. Like this is like that.
Yeah, right. Like I recognize this. Cool. Well, I love that. Thank you for giving me that insight about the power of that creative state. I think it's a great point that I'm going to be looking for now when I get it really into something.
Yeah. Yeah. Recognize it and stay there and bask in it. And to me, it's a place of gratitude, just this happiness, joy, this gratitude where you can block out everything and just focus on this one thing that's making you happy. So
that's great. I love it.
So is there anything else we didn't cover? Because I know you probably had things you wanted to cover.
No. I love just where the conversation goes is where it needs to go. I feel like we talked about a lot of things that I really enjoyed talking about and that hopefully are going to be of value to your audience. So I feel good.
And I kind of want to give you a place to, I don't want to say explain yourself, but, allow people to know that Swedenborg it's not satanic. It's not new age.
I think
That
that
it does come from
yeah.
the Bible, and it does come from Jesus, and it does come from these spiritual experiences that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that if you spend any time looking at what Swedenborg is saying, you'll see that this is just an extension of Jesus's message, and or an explaining of it. And Swedenborg doesn't go more than a couple pages without talking about Jesus. I mean, he calls Jesus the Lord, as was customary in his time, but that word is everywhere in every book all the time. And biblically, I don't think there's any other theologian that spends more time in the Bible than Swedenborg does. I mean, his entire works, almost all of his works, are about unpacking the symbolism in the Bible and the meaning in the Bible. So it's downtown Christianity. And I think that what you come away with, though, is not just that it's got that intellectual connection, but once you see the kind of life that it's calling you toward and the kind of person it's trying to make you into, you see it also connects you to that love side of Christianity that we were talking about earlier today. So to me, I think it might sound weird. Oh, there's Swedenborg. What's that? It's a strange sounding name of some guy. What's this? He had spiritual experiences. That sounds weird. He lived a long time ago, whatever. That's weird. But once you start to get into what the message is, it feels familiar, and it feels like, oh, I recognize this, just like you were saying about that. So if anyone's interested in learning more, go to youtube.com/offtheLeftEye, which he had an experience where it seemed like a covering. We talked about spiritual eyes being open, where a covering was rolled off of his left eye because the left has to do with the intellect or your mind. We talked about in this interview here, it's the mind and the heart, and getting both of those in alignment. So if we get our mind clear to what the real message of Jesus is, then the heart can follow. So Off the Left Eye, youtube.com/offtheLeftEye. We got more than 1,000 videos on every topic within Christianity and spiritual experiences that you could hope for. And we try to give really thorough, clear explanations. It might not be for everyone, but we love to just make it accessible. So if it's something that can help grow your relationship with God, then we want to be a part of that, and try to, as you're saying, bring everybody more and more onto the same page and bring that kind of heaven on earth.
Sounds awesome. Is there a documentary or any little movie or anything made about his life that?
Yeah, there was a documentary called Splendors of the Spirit, which is on the Swedenborg Foundation's YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Swedenborg Foundation, I believe. It was made a couple of decades ago, but it's good. That's there. There's a couple of good biographies that we have on Swedenborg.com. You can even start on his Wikipedia page. There's a great summary there of his life and impact.
I wish I could remember. A few weeks ago, I was watching a movie, and I cannot think of what it is. If it comes to me, I'll message you. And
Sure.
They start talking about Swedenborg on this movie. And
It's got to be Things Heard and Seen on Netflix.
Maybe.
Because I just know that came out recently, and it talks about Swedenborg a ton in it.
Does it? Okay. Maybe that was it. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Enjoy your weekend.
Great to see you again, Peggy. I hope you have a great weekend too.
All right. Bye-bye.